I'd just like to welcome you. Adam, it's always very nice to see you. And he coordinates the Great Coffee Count and the Carnaby's breeding surveys. He worked for the Department of Biodiversity and Conservation and Attraction on mallee vegetation research in the wheat belt, and as just a matter of interest, that Adam's wife was born and grew up in Moora. Welcome, Adam. Thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. So I'm going to talk about Carnaby's black cockatoos, which is, there are quite a few around in Moora at the moment. Come to visit Wally again, and so it's a good area for it. So I guess a few of you know a bit of background about Carnaby's. Some of you may not, so I'll just talk a bit about Carnaby's. So they're a charismatic and iconic species that a lot of people really love. They're endangered, so that's an EPBC listing. They're semi-migratory, so they travel from the coast to the wheat belt and back and forth every year. They are granivorous, so they mainly eat seed. They're long-lived, so 30 to 40 years they can live, and they have quite a slow breeding biology. So each year they'll lay 2 eggs. They may fledge 1 chick normally, and they do that probably every other year. So that means that over their lifespan they will produce quite a few chicks compared to other species. And they have a declining population. So the Great Cocky Count data, for example, that shows that the Perth Peel region population is declining by 5 to 10% every single year, which is an incredibly steep decline and is the main reason why they are listed as endangered. Okay, just a bit about the distribution. The darker orange is the breeding season, so that goes from around July through to January, and you can see Moora over here. And then the non-breeding season, which is mainly the summer and the autumn, and there's an eastern population and this kind of western population as well. Okay, so as I said, they're semi-migratory. Breeding starts at around 3 to 4 years of age. So until that time, the sub-adult birds will stay in coastal areas. The females return to their natal area to breed. So when they reach 3 or 4 years, they will return to where they were born every year, and they'll bring the male who may be from a different region. They won't necessarily go to the same hollow, but the same general area. They lay 2 eggs, and normally only 1 chick will fledge from that. But sometimes, if it's a good year, then 2 chicks may be able to fledge. Incubation is about a month, and then after that they will fledge in around 70 days. Okay, the chicks, they stay with their parents for the first year. If the parents don't breed in the subsequent year, the chick will stay with them for an extra year. And this is a really critical bit. They nest in large hollows in eucalypt trees, and these are quite few and far between now, unfortunately. So the loss of old trees and hollows for nesting and as forage has led to a decline in their breeding rates. So that's obviously from historic clearing for agriculture and ongoing clearing. So that's what has brought about the introduction of artificial hollows. So people like Wally Kirchhoff, the WA Museum, they have designed hollows which can be installed and which Carnaby's actually take to really well. So this is a bit of a success story. Yes, we have lost a lot of hollows from trees, And this is one solution that we have to rely on now, unfortunately, because we just don't have enough natural hollows. So, and this is another really important part. You can't just plonk up an artificial hollow and expect the birds to use it and to fledge chicks. They need the hollow. They need water within 2 kilometres, and really importantly, they need enough food within 6 to 12 kilometres of that hollow to be able to provide for the chick, for it to fledge. And so you need the hollow, but you also need to retain and replant food plants for carnabees for them to be able to breed. So the key habitat, really important food plants. Marri is very important, and proteaceous plants, so Banksias, Hackias, and other plants in that group are really important, and also pine trees. So carnabees have taken to pines. This is an introduced species of Mediterranean pines, but they've taken to them, and they get a lot of. It's really critical habitat for them now. So they rely on that these days. Unfortunately, it's got them into a bit of trouble because the pines north of Perth in the Nangara region are being removed, and they are not being replanted now. So that action alone is going to lead to a roughly 50% decline in the carnabee population of the Perth Peel region, and it's a real shame. It's a very complicated story with the pines sitting over the Nangara aquifer. They're intercepting the water from getting into the aquifer. So the theory is that you take the trees away, and the aquifer will replenish, and the aquifer obviously is an important source of water for Perth. They need fresh water, and sometimes if they don't get that, they will die. About 10 years ago, there was a flock of around 200 carnabees near Esperance on a really hot summer day, and the whole flock died because they obviously couldn't find water. They need large trees for roosting, and as I said, large trees for nesting as well. Okay, the key threats: land clearing. Land clearing. Can you guess the next one? Land clearing. So that is the massive driver for the decline of carnabees. We've seen the historic clearing in the wheat belt. There's ongoing clearing for mining and for other reasons, and this is the big one really. As I said, it's historic and ongoing. Reasons: so forestry. Obviously, down south, things like the karri trees are being removed for forestry, and also pine trees are obviously being removed. Roads. So we've heard a lot about this recently as roads are widened, trees are removed, and a lot of our big salmon gums and big wandus are on road reserves. Farming activities, so we have the historic clearing, but obviously we've heard about it today. Those paddock trees, those 200-300-year-old trees are being removed, and the value of those trees is just immense. You know, if you ask me, if you remove one of those trees, a 300-year-old tree, you should probably have to plant 300 or even 3,000 more trees, because the value of that tree is absolutely immense. Mining. We've got there's a really important breeding area for carnabees near Ravensthorpe, and unfortunately there's a lot of lithium sitting underneath that breeding reserve. So there's a proposal to mine that area, and there's probably 200-300 pairs of carnabees that fledge chicks from that every year. So that could be a huge loss, and that's something that the BirdLife is trying to work on to stop that mine going ahead. There's housing, especially around Perth. Every time a block is subdivided, a large tree is normally removed, and that's a big issue in Perth. And there are other reasons. Is it unstoppable? Well, I'd like to think that it isn't, because it's not just the health of carnivores that rely on trees. Human beings rely on trees for shade, for our well-being, and I think that's becoming more recognised, and I hope that message gets across. This is a tree that some of you would know around here. This is at Magumba Reserve. It's now surrounded by these corrals as part of the rodeo. There's a nest just there, and so you can see that the pressure on that bird might be. But I was quite encouraged. On my way driving up today, I stopped at Magumba, and I gave the tree trunk a bit of a scratch, and a Carnaby hen popped its head out, and then I put a camera in, and there's 2 eggs in that nest. So they are this is a very resilient and adaptable species, and that gives me hope for the future. I'll just talk a bit about what BirdLife does in this space. So one of our big events that happens every year is the Great Cocky Count. It's happened every year since 2010, and up to 900 volunteers volunteer every year. They go out to roost sites and count the carnivores or lots of different, the 3 different black cockatoos. We survey over 400 sites in 2018. So, this is a really important event, and as I said, the results show that the decline of carnivores is fairly steep, unfortunately. We also do breeding surveys. So we have a dedicated team of volunteers who go out at their own expense. They sometimes travel hundreds, thousands of kilometres to go and do these surveys. 1,600 hours last year, 29 sites, over 700 hollows were surveyed, and this is a bit of a summary of the results. The important thing to see here is the percentage that were active, so that had breeding in them. So for natural hollows, around 14%, and almost double, more than double that for artificial hollows. So that shows that artificial hollows do work, and that's a good thing. This is Carnaby's chick that is just about ready to fledge in a natural hollow. This is a much younger chick in an artificial hollow, and this is a competing species. Does anyone know what those parrots are? Yeah, that's right, regent parrots. And really interesting, we found at one site around Newdigate that over half of the artificial hollows that were put out for carnivores were being used by regent parrots. So, it's an endemic species that's competing for this real estate. Okay, what does the future hold for Carnaby's black cockatoo? Well, unfortunately, I think we're going to see an ongoing decline of carnivores in the Perth Peel region, driven by the clearing of the pine plantations and by other clearing in that region. Other populations might be able to fare better, as there is less pressure on their habitat, and also because of the success of artificial hollows. But we do need to slow the rate of clearance. That's pretty clear, and we also need to speed up the rate that we're planting trees. And people like the Moore Catchment Council are a great example of doing that and getting in there and planting trees, and good on them for that. Now, Rachel asked me to talk a bit about the wonders and the woes of the wheat belt and maybe a few solutions, so I'll quickly just give my 2 bobs worth. Obviously, the wildflowers are amazing. I love coming out and seeing the wildflowers. I'm a real orchid lover, so that's a really special thing for me. And the wide open spaces is something we don't get in Perth a lot, and I think we really need to, it's great to come out here for that. The woes. Well, salinity for me is a big thing. I worked for about a decade working on mallee revegetation, and so I've seen that firsthand. I've been to places like Lake Tarblin, which, if any of you have seen, that's a great example of what salt can do to a beautiful natural area. And the loss of our ancient trees, I think that's a real tragedy. It's very sad to hear about roadside trees like on the York to Quairading road. To see those being removed is heartbreaking, I think. Maybe some solutions. So we used to have bounties for shooting things like wedge-tailed eagles and thylacines. What if we had a bounty for preserving things? So you paid landowners for preserving a tree, or for every Carnaby's chick that was fledged off their land. The things we're doing at the moment aren't working, so maybe we've got to look outside the box a bit. And I really think agroforestry and carbon farming is a part of the solution. I worked on mallee re-veg, and the products that you can get from an endemic species, a local species, things like electricity, eucalyptus oil, activated carbon, and you could even, there are people working at the moment on a liquid transport fuel that will come from biomass. So, you can get all of these things from mallee trees, and you can plant them in alleys, and it can be part of a diverse farming system of the future. Okay, thank you.